now we're starting live. Senate Judiciary, April 22nd, 2020, remotely meeting. And the first item on the agenda is intercepts. And by that, I mean where the tax department and others intercept unemployment checks or the CARES Act individual checks. The Attorney General sent out, we had this scheduled on our agenda this week, and the Attorney General had a statement today or an order, I don't know what it is, that to stop all these intercepts. So Joshua Diamond was kind enough to join us this morning with about 20 minutes notice. So Josh, if you could take over, we'd appreciate hearing from you about what exactly the Attorney General's order is.
Certainly.
I guess it's called a directive.
That is correct, Senator Sears. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Joshua Diamond, Deputy Attorney General on behalf of the Attorney General's office. Yesterday, I believe, our office issued a directive, so not an order, but a directive as to how we will interpret Vermont law as it applies to collection activity by debt collectors, creditors, banks in particular. So private parties with regards to the stimulus checks issued under the CARES Act. It is our belief that the payments issued under the stimulus check are designed to preserve and to meet the immediate basic needs of Vermonters and Vermont families at this time of extreme economic dislocation, to make sure that basic needs such as food, rent, mortgage, utility needs are met. And these benefits are necessary to ensure that the basic necessities of Vermont families will be met during these difficult times. We started prior to this directive by asking Secretary Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, to issue regulations under his authority to declare that these benefits would be considered quote unquote benefit payments under federal law to exempt them from garnishment. Unfortunately, the Treasury Secretary has not taken action in that regard. So as we looked at Vermont law, what we found was 12 VSA section 2740, subsection 19I, that essentially prohibits from attachment or writs of execution those future earning payments that are needed or reasonably necessary to support an individual and their dependents. And so looking at that, we felt as if, at least under Vermont law, there was a basis to preclude creditors, debt collectors from going after those payments. So the directive was viewed in that regard. If that helps answer the question.
That helps. I think it leads to two questions. One is that doesn't mean that the bill isn't still owed. It just means that you're not taking the money right now. Is that correct?
Correct. So if
are they able to add interest and penalties during this period?
I could not speak to that because I think it probably depends on the various commercial relationships or contractual relationships that exist between the creditor and the debtor. But for purposes of a creditor looking at these monies to collect now, we believe that it would be inappropriate to access those monies to get relief for debts owed.
So if I got Senator White and Senator Nick here after this question. So jumping to the state of Vermont intercepts, does the order include the state of Vermont through the tax department intercepting, for example, a CARES Act check for unemployment owed that was overpaid, or for child support or various fines or whatever that we're intercepting through the tax department?
So the directive was primarily directed at private parties. We would hope that our colleagues in the tax department would also follow our lead with regards to the important policy implications that underlie the directive. My understanding is that Commissioner Bolio will be testifying later today. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but I have good reason to believe that they are also working very hard not to engage in collection activity that would look to the stimulus payments as offsets for state taxes due.
What about child support and other things like that?
And I've, with the caveat that I'm not an expert in this field, but I have had a chance to chat with the Director of Child Support prior to my testimony today, Ms. Robin Arnell. And I've been informed that OCS, the Office of Child Support, has suspended enforcement activities as it pertains to the collection of these monies. They may be under some type of federal requirement to act in this space, but I would have to defer to her as to the details. But I know
Thank
that
you.
they are grappling with the same issue, trying to address the same policy issues.
Thanks, Josh. Is Senator White had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I may have misheard or just not heard, but you referred to the stimulus checks. So in my mind, that's the $1,200 that people are going to be getting. But does this also apply to their unemployment checks? I mean, are you directing the same measures that people not garnish the unemployment checks?
So the directive, the four corners of the directive was limited to the stimulus checks, because that's where the questions were coming to our office from and we wanted to address quickly. But our hope would be the same would apply to unemployment as well, for the same policy reasons, that these federal dollars are necessary to support the basic needs of Vermonters at this time. And I can tell you anecdotally, and would encourage you maybe to reach out to the judiciary, that I believe the courts in a number of counties have suspended activities. They're not taking up cases seeking collections and garnishments at this time for similar reasons.
Great. Senator Nika.
I have the same kind of questions. A couple of people, their check may already have been grabbed because they owed money for an overpayment on unemployment insurance and have already been paying back gradually. And then now they believe, when they went and looked at their account, that a very large amount was taken out, and they think that probably was what was coming into them under some new program now. And the other one was people, I'm wondering, and probably we need to ask the tax department, was with regard to people who are already under garnishments through the court, are those being held? Will those need to be paid?
I'd have to defer to the commissioner on this, who I understand is coming before your committee later today.
Yeah, he's
And our
next
hope
on
would
the,
be-
he's next on the agenda, Alice. So,
Okay,
Our hope that they would also be honoring the same policy objectives that we're trying to achieve.
thanks.
Other questions for Josh? Josh, thanks for joining us on short notice. And if you can hang in there, there may be other questions as we talk to some other witnesses. If you can't, we understand.
Yes, I'm happy to stay for a while.
Okay, thank you. The next witness is Craig Bolio, from the tax department. Craig,
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
we do, we can.
Oh,
Yes,
perfect.
thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry, I wasn't thinking of the stimulus checks as a big central part of this. So I was a little flat-footed at the start, because actually my office is not involved in offsets on the stimulus checks in any way. So there's no provision to offset it for state taxes. In fact, I think there's a federal provision that you can't offset it for state taxes. There may be other provisions. I'd also talked to Robin Arnell at the Office of Child Support, and my understanding is that there may be some federal provisions for offset in other departments, but if there are, they're going directly from the federal government to those departments. So none of the stimulus money is actually going through my department to be offset in any way. When we're talking about just ordinary state tax refunds, our interpretation of the law is that I don't have discretion to stop external intercepts. So I'm looking at under Title 32, Chapter 151 and Subchapter 12 lays out a lot of the procedures for external intercepts. And I'm specifically looking at 5933 and 5934 subsection B in both of those. Both of them are a shall. And so it provides an opportunity for other state agencies and some non-state entities to certify debt to us. And then once it is certified, the tax commissioner shall send offsets to those areas. So should we want to stop that for state refunds that are going out now, I do believe that would require some legislative intervention. I spoke with Senate Finance actually on this same topic yesterday. You know, the one message that I would share with the committee is similar to what I shared yesterday, which is to make sure that we're being thoughtful on which ones we want to stop and which ones we don't. We have probably, I think we have over 20 unique partners. And, you know, our three largest partners in terms of money that we send to them is Vermont Judiciary. But then after that is Office of Child Support and Vermont State Colleges. And then number 4 is the Vermont Restitution Unit. And so I don't know all the inner workings of how the restitution money is used, but in talking with the Office of Child Support, it does sound like much of the money that comes from intercepts goes directly to caregivers there and is not retained by situations where the state is the caregiver. So I just want to be thoughtful about if we stop those intercepts, where is that money ultimately going, right? I think it might be different if it's just going to the general fund versus if it's actually going to people in need. But I would just recommend the committee and the legislature talk to those agencies who are getting that intercept money to make sure that we all understand the
Greg,
implications.
Senator Baruth has a question.
Sure.
Just quickly, a little follow-up on I was surprised to hear that the state colleges were the third recipient. Is that for anything owed to the state colleges, i.e., you know, tuition that someone hasn't been able to come up with, or university fees? What would that be?
I can't speak in great detail to that. Often it can be private student loans that have been issued by the college as well, but it may be fees. It may be a whole hodgepodge of things. Unfortunately, I'd have to defer to them to really know the details of that. We just get the debt, but from many agencies, we don't necessarily get a lot of details of what compromises that debt.
Could I
Comprises.
ask a favor? If you could just send me offline as chair of Senate Education, we're deeply involved in the state colleges now. So any information about how their finances work is of interest to me. If you could just let me know how much that stream is and what sorts of debt it might be encompassing, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I believe the amounts we send are public. I'll verify that and I'll send you whatever information I'm able to.
Thank you.
It does lead to another question, Craig, and that is, are these amounts like set so that they've been negotiated with the payer, that I'll pay $100 a month or $100 a week or something of that nature? Or do we just intercept the entire payment when it's something like the CARES Act or unemployment or a lottery winning?
So, I can only speak to the tax refund situation. Again, we're not doing any intercepts on the CARES Act through my office, and we don't do any intercepts for unemployment checks or the lottery through my office. When it comes to what the tax department does, we get a full debt file that's supposed to be certified and final from the agency. So they've exhausted administrative remedies. And so I would presume, but I can't speak with certainty, that those kind of situations would not involve folks who are in payment plans. And what we do is essentially say, so if they sent us, you owe $500 for whatever agency, we will offset up to that amount. So it won't be that this year we take 100 and next year we take 100. We offset a refund until it satisfies that debt.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Craig? Thank you, Craig. The next witness is
Thanks for having
Pat
me.
Gable. Thank you for joining us. Pat Gable and Greg Mosley from the courts.
Good
And I don't know,
morning.
good morning. Pat sent a memo that's on the website. Um, So maybe you can, I can get back to that if I'm able to get back into my,
Is there a picture of it that someone can put on the screen?
that would make it impossible for me to see the committee and know when somebody's asked a question.
Alice,
Pen-
Why don't you just,
if you
why
go
don't-
into your documents for on today's calendar, under the committee website, it's
Yeah.
right there.
I know, but Alice wanted it on the screen, and if I put it on the screen,
Oh,
Maybe,
then I wouldn't be able to see people.
no, if
Senator
Peggy,
Rika, would you like me to email it to you?
no. I'll see if I can go on my phone to the website.
Okay, Pat, do you want to talk a
Oh,
little bit about what you call judicial offsets?
Yes, and I'm going to just speak briefly before I turn it over to Greg Mosley. Greg is our Chief of Finance and Administration. In fact, I think he may have testified before your committee before on these kinds of issues. And before he joined us, he worked for the tax department, so he may have some unique insights there.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is that when you do have a chance to look at the memo, you'll see that prior to 2017, the way that the Vermont Judiciary collected monies owed, and these are mostly criminal fines and Judicial Bureau civil collections, we had a number of different methods to do that. And over time, for policy reasons, the legislature has reduced the number of ways that we could motivate people to pay. And as you know, the judiciary doesn't take a position on policy issues like that. But what it has done is essentially left tax intercepts as the chief way that we are able to collect if we are not able to collect monies through administrative means. And in the letter that Greg will explain in a minute, it identifies the process, which is we collect money, but then based on legislation, that money gets sent off to all different kinds of agencies, a couple of nonprofits, some of it comes to us. And so we are a collector, and then we disseminate monies. And a number of years ago, I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the legislature really had a big push to get us to increase collections. So as time has gone on, and for various policy reasons, the ability to motivate people to pay has gone down again. And when I turn it over to Greg, he can explain the mechanics of how that works. I would just like to say, from the judiciary's point of view, we leave to the legislature and sometimes the executive branch, depending on jurisdiction, the policy choices about what to do. And so it really is up to the legislature to decide whether they want us to stop sending accounts to the tax department for collection or not. And we'll obviously follow the policy. The other thing that's laid out in the letter is what the impact of that would be, particularly on the judiciary. Sorry.
The question isn't whether the person still owes it and it should be collected. The question is whether the CARES Act $1,200 should be used as a special item to using that money to collect an old fine or whatever it might be that you're seeking to collect. Should the entire $1,200, if the person owed, say, $2,000, should the entire $1,200 be attached? And the other question is, should those special $600 a week unemployment checks be also attached? The question isn't whether or not the person should still owe the money, and that if they got a tax refund or something coming, that we should treat that the way we do all of those issues. And if they're on a weekly, they should continue to pay that if they can. The real problem here is these funds were set up for a different purpose. So that's what we're looking at. We've had I think all of us have had concerns expressed by constituents about having some of that CARES Act money taken. Much of it's already gone, as I understand it. So I'm not sure, at least that's what we've been told. And I don't know for sure that that's the case. So I don't know if that's a different question. I don't think anybody's proposing stopping the collection. It's the question of whether we should be using the $600 a week federal check or the $1,200 special CARES Act. And and I'm kind of following what the Attorney General's directive says.
So,
Is that helpful?
So as Greg will explain in a minute, we don't have a constant collection stream going to the tax department. We send accounts to the tax department at certain times of the year, and then after that, it's over to them. But maybe this would be a good time for me to turn it over to Greg, and he can talk a little bit about the mechanics of how that works. You know, obviously, again, the judiciary doesn't take a position on that. We are, you know, prepared to follow whatever policy the legislature and the
I just want to make clear to anybody that may be listening in that we're not looking to forgive indebtedness to the state of Vermont or to whomever. The question is, should we be using those special checks that are designed to allow people to live during this difficult time?
So I can explain a little bit about how the judicial offset works. And I can clarify for everybody that we are not offsetting the CARES Act money, the $1,200, and we're not offsetting any unemployment money that goes out as well. So the only thing that the judiciary does is we send our debts over to the tax department, and they will offset state tax refund money only. So there is no concern about the CARES Act money or unemployment money.
Well, I'm curious as to what happened to those people's monies.
I'm not aware that anybody at the state level is able to intercept the federal dollars. I think that's happening. If it's happening, it's probably happening at the federal level. And I don't know much about how that works. I can explain a little bit about the judicial offsets and where that money goes and who's impacted by it.
Yeah, please.
So the judiciary sends a couple of different types of debts over to the tax department, and it's a seasonal thing. We send the debts over like the other 24-ish departments. We send it over in December, and the tax department loads it into their system for the coming refunding season, which usually starts in February. It goes, you know, the tax deadline is usually April 15th. Refunds are usually out the door sometime by July. This year, it's hard to say how that's all going to play out. I would imagine things get delayed. But we send Defender General debt over to the tax department, and when that is collected, that gets sent directly to the Defender General. So far this year, I think they've collected about $113,000 for the Defender General. And we also send Judicial Bureau debts. And as you probably know, that's a mixture of all different types of things, mostly traffic tickets, but it's civil violations. Sometimes it's fish and game tickets. Sometimes it's late fees or things like that, surcharges also. So the money goes to a variety of different places, and I can tell you a little bit about that in a second. And then this year we did something different. We also sent over our trial court debt, which the vast majority of that is criminal fines and fees. And a small piece of that is juvenile fines or fees. And that was new this year. And that, I think, is what bumped us up on the tax offset list. You've heard tax commissioners say that we are the #1 tax offset partner. I think it's because of this new trial court debt that we sent over. So we sent over about $14 million in Judicial Bureau debts, and the tax department has collected about $330,000 so far this year. This season, I should clarify, this is a calendar year since the tax season starts in January, not a fiscal year. And so they've collected about 2% of that debt. And what happens with that, since it's a mixture of different debts, where that money goes obviously depends on the underlying debt that they're paying off. About 54% of that money goes to either V-Trans or the municipality, depending on where that traffic ticket was written. And another 18% goes to Victim Compensation Fund. And then 9% goes to the Crime Victim Restitution Fund. 8% goes to the Judiciary's Tech Fund. And 6% goes to the Domestic and Sexual Assault Special Fund. And then 5% goes to the General Fund. So you can see that the revenue allocation for the Judicial Bureau debt's pretty complicated. And then with the trial court debt, so far, tax department has collected $989,000, so just shy of $1 million this year, and that all goes to the general fund. On average,
But you're owed it, but you're owed 12 million.
12 million from the trial courts and 14 million for the Judicial Bureau.
Okay.
And so far this year, we've collected 330,000 for Judicial Bureau and just shy of $1 million for trial court.
And that's coming out of tax refunds,
State tax refunds.
nothing else.
That, well, I believe they also offset the property tax adjustments that happen in July,
Oh, okay.
but that's it. We're not touching the CARES Act money. We're not touching unemployment money.
If somebody wins the lottery and owes you 200,000, is that intercepted?
We don't offset lottery winnings either.
Who does?
I would check with finance and management. I think if you're a vendor doing work with the state, or you owe the state money as a vendor, I think that they'll intercept almost any vision payment.
It's getting more complicated than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out who took their money.
You know, the one other thing that I would add with the Judicial Bureau debts is that the tax offset has grown considerably in the last few years. It was just 2 years ago, if you look at calendar year 17, for example, we collected about $700,000 for Judicial Bureau, and we didn't have trial court debt in there at all at the time. So because of different changes happening with the collections and the suspension of licenses, the teeth of collections has really changed a lot. And so that what happened is we're getting fewer voluntary payments, and then we're collecting more in the involuntary payment method, which is tax offset. And so that went from 700,000 to last year we collected 1.4 million just for Judicial Bureau.
Wow.
And so it pretty much doubled. And now if you take that plus the trial court, which is the new debt, we're at $1 million for this year. So it's a big collection tool for the judiciary, but it's only taking money from state income tax refunds.
Thank you. Questions for Greg or Pat? It's been very helpful, but I almost feel like I don't have the right person. Maybe it is child support. I know that I can remember writing bills. I don't know if Michelle can remember, on child support and the collection of child support over the years. So I recollect something about child support being allowed to be taken out of the CARES Act funds, the $1,200. But, and if that's going directly to the care of the child, I suppose that's, that's one thing. If it's going to the state, that's another. But we probably need to hear from Robin Arnell and some others to figure out. You had a constituent who had money taken out of the CARES Act. Am I correct, Senator Nika?
We had two people. Dick McCormick had a person whom he referred to who was under the gun for that. And also Senator Ash sent us a letter
Yeah.
from a constituent of his who was worried that she thinks she already had something taken and is worried that the rest of it will be taken. I think that's what that letter said.
Well,
but where that happened,
those persons who received the direct deposit have presumably already received it. Mine was in my account on Saturday, I think, or Friday last week.
Right. I was thinking of the unemployment insurance on those,
Yeah,
that had been, that, in other words, that their unemployment insurance money that they're to get now because they've been laid off because of COVID, that money
Yeah.
has been taken.
Josh, do you have any thoughts on whom we should hear from on this? You need to unmute yourself, Josh.
I'm sorry, is the question with regards to child
Are
support?
there other people that we should hear from that you can think of on this subject that you didn't get in your directive?
I think certainly talking to the folks from the Office of Child Support would be helpful. So to the extent that there are federal offsets that are beyond the control of the state, and they may be able to speak to that with more clarity than I could.
So this is basically the testimony, if I can summarize, the court as well as the tax department are not touching either of those categories. And the directive from the Attorney General is that private businesses, banks, and so forth aren't supposed to either.
That is correct.
So who's doing it? So Michelle, can you look into this for our next meeting as to who
Sure.
else might be doing this
Mhm.
under statute that has the ability to do that?
Sure.
I wonder if Adam Gresham would have any details,
He may.
might be a source.
Senator Sears, can I just get a clarification? Because I'm just now coming to this issue. So the issue is that if people who are receiving their CARES Act check through a direct deposit, but that it's not actually $1,200 that's going in, but maybe like 600 or 900, so it's already been garnished before it hits their account?
That's the allegation, yes.
And so there's no way that the recipient of the CARES Act funds they're not seeing who is debiting that money, or they can't tell who's garnishing it or anything like that.
That's my understanding. And I also, some people may not get the entire $1,200 when the check comes in the mail that are not under direct deposit. And the concern is additionally that will some of those people who are now collecting the $600 a week in enhanced unemployment have those funds attached as well?
Right. So shouldn't we be talking to some, I guess I'm just wondering, it's sounding more like it's not something necessarily at the state level, but something that's happening with regard to an existing judgment or something happening that people have with the federal funds. So before it ever gets to
Or I
us,
suppose it could be a judgment in small claims court. For example, you've had a judgment against you in small claims. I don't know if they can do that. For example, you didn't pay your credit card bill, and the credit card company takes you to small claims court for the $4,000, let's say. And would that be also in it? I don't know these answers. And
right.
Senator White.
So I think we need to be clear from the people who Senator Nitka's person and Senator Ash's person about whether they got the $1,200 in their account and then it was removed by someone, or whether they never got the full $1,200 to begin with. Because I think that knowing that will help us determine where it's being taken from. Because if they didn't get the entire $1,200, then it seems to me that it wasn't a state issue at all. It was a federal issue. And if they did get it, then we should be able to figure out who took it. But I think that's important to know.
Senator McCormick said that his constituent and Senator Nitka's constituent had the money removed because they were overpaid unemployment in the past, and they were making that up, and that's where the money went.
But did he get the full 1,200 and then it was removed? I think we need to know that.
Well, I think we need to know who took it. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Alice.
I can have, Michelle, I can have Senator McCormick send you the notes he has on the person in our town. And then I can forward to you the letter from Tim Ash with regard to his constituents' information.
That would be helpful.
It's basically, it's a unemployment insurance issue whereby, you know, they're getting unemployment now. As I say, the one person had been paying off an overpayment, but now suddenly what she thinks is the additional new unemployment money suddenly was grabbed, like the whole thing.
And are we hearing from labor today?
No,
I guess that's where we should be. That's a good source. Mhm.
Okay,
They're out straight. Michael Harrington might be the place.
right.
And for Ms. Ryan, I'm trying to figure out, is that a big hand behind you or your own? It's a big hand behind you.
it's the hand behind her. It's a helping hand. I think it's United Way or,
Yeah.
Broad community action.
yeah, at first I did think she had her hand up. But it's better than some of the things behind us, huh?
Right.
All right. I think what we'll try to do is pick up here next time we have a meeting, and hopefully we can get more clarity. And if Josh has more clarity on some of these issues, we'd love to hear from him again as well. Pat and Greg, thank you so much for.
Could I ask just one question of Josh?
Of course.
Josh, with regard, you said that the Attorney General issued the directive, I think you said yesterday, but
Yeah.
is it retroactive? Is
So,
it retroactive?
well, in the sense that it's our interpretation of the law. So
Okay.
yes, I mean, the law was in place, has been in place for a while. So it would have applied just from the get-go when the issue of those checks went out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to Chris Fenno from the Center for Crime Victim Services to try to get an update on how the center has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and what actions. As you know, the center does rely some on all of these collections, and if people are out of work and so forth, the center gets impacted, but there's also a lot of federal money coming. And I know that many of the network programs have reached out to me with concerns about some of their increased costs because the number of cases with domestic violence, you can't use a congregate setting, and you need to place people in hotels, which are more expensive than some of the congregate settings. So we're going to try throughout this period to try to get updates from various players in the criminal justice system and juvenile justice system to understand how the COVID is impacting them, to perhaps provide advice to the Appropriations Committee. So Chris, take it away.
Great. Chris Fenno, Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. Thank you, Senator Sears and committee members for wanting this update. I know that you know it's very sort of trying times. Unfortunately, crime doesn't stop when people, I mean, I guess nationally there is some trends that crime is not happening as much, but the kinds of crimes that continue to happen are somewhat exacerbated by being in the house with potentially the person who has been abusing you. So you probably all know that there have been, since the virus sort of hit, there have been a number of murders, which happens to be for the center, one of our largest allocation that goes out is for families of homicide victims, because there's usually multiple family members that are eligible, and each of them can get up to $10,000. So if there's 5 immediate family members, it's $50,000 potentially. So that kind of continues. We have 4 areas of concern. One is the Victims Compensation Program, which we consider an essential service because getting those claims processed and getting reimbursement to happen is an important thing. One of the very first things that happened with one of the first murders was that the family members were out of state. They were actually on the West Coast. And so trying to get airplane tickets and that kind of thing to get them here. And the second murder, the family member could not travel and needed cremation, and then the ashes sent to their house in, I think it was Ohio. So those kinds of process, while it sort of sounds like an easy thing, it really honestly isn't. I was still working in our office when these calls came in. I called in a compensation specialist, and she worked about 10 hours on each of those claims to ensure that, you know, reached out to families. We certainly worked a lot with major crimes unit here in the state, who very quickly got us probable cause, and we were able to really expedite some of that service. But also just prior claims need to be paid. So that process, we couldn't have everybody in our database for compensation is not accessible offsite. So we have every day covered, but one person coming in to cover their caseload and also any emergencies that might happen. Our grantees, as Senator Sears said, I've been in contact with the network, and then also through our human trafficking initiative. I know that the hotel rooms and the food costs are going sort of way up because people need to be in a safe place and they can't do that congregate housing. And so we certainly have talked a lot with the network about that. The restitution unit is basically none of the collectors are working, and they're because we're not collecting, but we do get automatic payments or credit card payments, and we're processing those. We also get lottery winnings. I know that was a question. Who gets that lottery money? We get it.
Right.
So, and that's just sent from, I think, the lottery folks. So we're doing minimal collecting, and then just what is there. We're not doing any kind of outreach or tracking like we normally do. And that we also have 2 advocates who work with the victims themselves. And they actually have been very busy, because once we've already paid out of the fund for them, and we're just we're collecting money for the rest of what's owed to them, they really want that money. And we're not going to be aggressive until things change, because it's just, people don't have any money. They're not working, or they're, so if people voluntarily send in their money, we're doing that, but really trying to work and support victims who may be really depending on those funds. And then finally, the state's attorney's office, those advocates are all working across the state. I believe some of them are working in their offices, some of them are working from home. We had just supplied all of them with cell phones in February, so that they do have that capacity to get into their email and do all of that work. So we're happy about that. So those are our 4 areas of concern. And then the before I get to the financial concerns, on the federal level, what we have seen, the first stimulus bill did include money from the Victims of Crime Act and the Violence Against Women Office. Originally, it was axed out. And so the only victims money that came through was through Health and Human Services for family violence. And so it's done by formula. Again, Vermont always sort of gets the short end of the stick, because the formula is always based on how many people you have in your state. So Vermont is getting, and we haven't gotten it yet, $190,000. And that money will be given over to, this is specific to respond to the COVID-19, and that money will go to it'll go to all the domestic violence programs. There are 2 standalone sexual assault programs that don't do domestic violence work, so they won't be getting that. We have heard that there is some movement to try to get the Office for Victims of Crime and the Office for Violence Against Women included in that if they ever get to the number 4 bill, it's not going to be until May sometime. Both of those offices were included during the 2008 recession as part of those stimulus bills. I don't know what sort of is going on the federal level that of why they were not included. So we're still holding out hope, and we are also tracking internally us from our grantees that can be directly tied to the virus.
So going back to the network programs, if I might,
Yep.
if the network programs are going to get 190,000 total,
Mhm.
and their costs are 400,000 total,
Yep.
using sums, is there any reason why we wouldn't suggest to the appropriations process that part of the total $1 trillion that's coming, billions, excuse me,
Mhm.
2.5 billion coming to state of Vermont, that some of that should be used to cover the cost of hotels, etc. I mean, those are the
Absolutely.
types of recommendations the committee needs to make. And so if you can get us figures on the total cost to, if the network could report to you the total cost, and we can recommend to the appropriations committee that we make sure that we cover those costs that are due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Not, I also expect there will be an uptick in both domestic violence cases reported and child abuse cases reported once things get back to whatever that new normal is going to look like. And I suspect that our courts and our human services and other agencies are going to be overwhelmed when that happens. And that's probably the subject of the next portion of the meeting, actually, in terms of the criminal, the prisoners and offenders. But I can just see this huge uptick on reporting, particularly child abuse, because kids aren't in school, they aren't seeing caregivers at daycare or whatever, and so all of those mandatory reporters are not seeing the kids at this point.
Right. I agree with you, and I think that is going to happen when schools get back into session or when camps start. You know, when kids can get into groups again where adults are supervising, I think that will happen. And I do know that most likely the domestic violence reporting and needs are going to increase greatly too. So absolutely, that's an important piece that should be included. We wished it had been included in the federal money so far, but it hasn't. And then just briefly, so you know what's happening on our office level, we have furloughed 14 staff people. And those were all people who could not do their work remotely. They were the 6 collectors from the restitution unit, 2 victim liaisons, 4 compensation specialists, our social media person, and our office manager. All of them are working between 4 and 8 hours a week. So we furloughed them not all of them, not all the collectors are working, because there just isn't the work for them right now. We also don't know what's going to happen when we get back in, whether we're going to need that full amount of people to do that. It may be something we need to build up to. So we have 14 people out. We have most of our staff who are exempt are continuing to work. Our human trafficking folks are working. Our grants managers are. This sort of lull is good for them. We got a grant, as some of you may remember, to do a grants management system. We got it from the Office for Victims of Crime. It's about $380,000, and it's finally here. So they're learning that. They're doing it all through Zoom and that. So they're keeping very busy. And our finance director is actually coming in one day a week to just get the paper pieces that she needs to get. She can enter Vision, and she and the office manager can do all the payments that way. So we've tried to prioritize getting payments out every Monday. And so far that has worked. You know, it's a difficult time, and we kept our staff on, even though they were unable to work up until this Monday. And that was when we made the decision to furlough people. But it's hard. They're all really dedicated people. They all work very hard. But we just couldn't continue, because what we're worried about right now, our special funds, we know how much we've got through March 31st. And the compensation fund was already down $100,000. The restitution fund was down $10,000. The domestic violence and sexual violence fund was actually up $33,000. But we think that we're not going to be able to really see how hard those funds are hit until probably the next 2 quarters. But we haven't even actually gone through to try to see how this is going to decimate our budget. But it is something that we know we need to work on.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for
We
having me.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
I wonder if we could take a 3-minute break to stretch ourselves and then get on to the next subject, which is the COVID-19 impact on support services for released prisoners or keeping people out of prison as well. And we've got a number of witnesses, and we'll try to hear from everybody in some kind of order, but people should feel free to jump in. But I'm going to start with Dale when we get back from the break.
Okay, I don't think I'll put the picture up if it's going to be a quick break. I'm going to mute everybody.
Hopefully it's a quick break.
Yeah.
Mute everybody, and we'll see you
And turn
in
your
5.
video off would be a good idea, and then put it back on when you come back.
Yes.
I've unmuted everybody, Senator Sears, for
Oh,
whatever.
thank you. Thank you. So thought I might start out with whoop, a while back, are we ready to get started again? I think all the committees
Yeah, we're
here.
live. I never shut it off. Yep.
Great. One of the things that I looked at the beginning of the pandemic was the 7 things from the Council of State Governments Justice Center that we should look for. And the questions were, are there procedures in place in advance of the release to ensure that the person is free from COVID-19? And does the person have basic supplies like food, hand sanitizer to ensure they remain healthy? Does the person have a safe home to return to or alternative community-based housing? Medical, behavioral health medications and services are available. Have we prepared the person with a technical literacy and equipment to receive and benefit from virtual rather than in-person supports? If the person is being released to parole or the supervision, how are we asking them to interact with the parole officer? If the local economy has collapsed, are we providing the person with access to public benefits to support themselves and their loved ones? We know that, and Dale can probably give us the exact numbers, but I believe we're about 300 down in our incarcerated population. That means tremendous pressure on all of those of you who are community providers, from See All Inc. to Brock to recovery services, diversion services, all the folks that are here. So maybe Dale, you could update us on where we're at in terms of release. I know many of them were people who were going to be on bail conditions. Some of that may not have been actual releases into parole or probation, but if we could talk a little bit about the numbers we're at today, and then we could hear from various folks that are on the agenda.
Yeah, so for the record, my name is Dale Crook. I am the Director of Field Services for the Vermont Department of Corrections. Today, our population is at 1885. It came at, so that is quite a turn since this COVID happened. We're looking at...
What were we at on January 1st or another date before this all?
I think we're using a number, I don't have exact, but it was 1660 or 1670 end of January-ish. I don't have the exact date, but we can get that to you, sir, if you need.
No, I just roughly, it was before the pandemic started, it was 1670-ish, so it's over 300, it's about 300 people.
Yep. And releases have probably have been through the department's expanded use of furlough. We've kind of lightened up on some of our restrictions in order to get more people out. It was very important for the department and our facilities for the safety of the population and staff that we do try to make some room so we can have isolation rooms and quarantine areas for our facilities. Right now, anyone that comes into one of our correctional facilities will actually be quarantined for 14 days. They'll be screened, and we're following the guidelines from the Department of Health as to have you had contact with anyone that's tested positive or close contact. Do you have any signs or symptoms? Regardless of those answers, they're still quarantined. And for at least a 14-day period without any signs or symptoms before they get moved into the general population. In order for us to do that, we've had to make room in our facilities. Generally, our facilities are running at like full or over capacity within the state. So by having the action done by the department, also there was action taken through some state's attorneys and defense attorneys. So there was detainers taken out. And I think one of the other impacts, there were less people coming into our facilities. So with all those actions, the numbers did drop quite a bit, relatively rapid. So that's where we're at right now. As you can imagine, operating corrections in this type of environment has been a bit challenging. We've been very creative. Ideas are coming from line staff all the way up. So what we've done right now in the field is we've really kind of minimized, or we didn't quite stop, but to minimize face-to-face contact with our offenders. We are, in some ways, we're actually increasing our contact because we're doing a lot of phone contact, Zoom, video conferencing, and we're doing that more than what our contact standards were for face-to-face. So that's kind of how we're supervising. And it's not just us, it's you know, the general theme around what the department's doing and what our partners are doing, and you have a lot of partners there, so they'll be able to chime in specifically what they're doing, is if they've cut back to face, they've closed down what they're doing, just because, for example, groups and AA meetings, is kind of hard to do and maintain social distancing. So there's been a lot more Zoom meetings with our providers, our work crews. We don't have work crews running right now. Those staff have been deployed into our correctional facilities to supplement staffing levels there. Our community corrections officers have been added to our facilities to supplement staffing there, because the staffing of our facilities is an absolute must. And so we have to do that. There's no questions about that. Other staff that's on call ready to come in. Yes.
Has the Mississippi population remained the same?
Yes,
At
I
the
believe
230, around 230.
I believe so. I don't think we have not made a transport in, I believe, but I'm not absolutely positive. That's not in my bailiwick. But I have not seen anything about the population coming down. I think there may be transports lined up. I think what the goal of the department is going to try to keep our in-state population as low as we can, just to be able to manage the COVID situation. We will definitely bring back individuals from Mississippi that are either prepared for release or that are in their cycle to come back to the States. We're not going to keep people there longer than we have to.
Okay. But in that figure of 1385, it includes the 236 and 230, whatever in Mississippi.
Correct. Right? That's our total population. Detainers. Our detainers are, if you give me a second, I can find our pop today. I think our detention population is quite low as well today. So it's been really an all-around effort from all of our partners in the criminal justice world to make it happen. So today's number is 1384. The in-state detention population is 267. So that has dropped quite a bit over the last 3 months or so.
That's down by about 120 from where it traditionally was 380 to 400, right?
I think it's varied. I think over the last 6 months, it's been around 350. It's hovering around there. So it's almost 100 drop or 100 person drop. Yeah. And I know there's hearings going on, I think as we speak, to try to look at who is more available to get released. The department doesn't control.
Okay. Question for Dale. Senator White first.
So thanks, Dale. One of the things that in my other committee, we're looking at how vulnerable communities are impacted by the COVID. And one of the things that we heard was that there is we don't have any data on who has been released and any race, ethnic, socioeconomic information on who's been released. And there's a feeling, I believe, that it may be disproportionately, how do I put this? Not proportional to the communities of color persons who are in corrections. So do we have that information? And there also was a question about whether the committee, and I don't remember what it's called. It has a name like RAPID or something like that. It's the committee that's looking at racial inequities in the justice system, if they had any role in helping being involved in how people were released and when. Thank you.
So I do believe that there's a request for that type of information. We don't, during the release process, our staff aren't tracking that, but our system, so I think we have to pull that. I can ask Monica if I think we've had requests for that. I can see if we can gather that information. That is a concern for us as well. The lens that we looked at to release our population was really the big thing was violent and public safety. So we really didn't loosen the rules, so to speak, for the violation. If we figure there was a victim or victim issues, Commissioner Baker has been absolutely clear on that. We're not gonna release individuals who are gonna put a strain on public safety.
So can I?
Yes.
Yeah,
Can I just do one little follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So if you do start collecting that data, or if you look at it, I think it's important to know whether you're collecting it, if it's self-identified data, or if it's data that's interpreted by the person who's doing the survey or the release, because sometimes people are unwilling to self-identify because it's often been used against them for different purposes. So just to be aware of how it's being collected and where the information is coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator White. If we could go now to Willa Farrell and David Scher from the Attorney General's office. Thoughts about diversion and all the other things that you all do?
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Sears and the rest of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our work. I can say, as you can imagine, with the courts only doing emergency hearings, that our referrals are down both in diversion and in pretrial services. But staff, as you know, have been carrying really heavy caseloads, so they've been really busy working remotely, as is everybody these days. They've been doing restorative justice panels remotely, and it's really been rewarding how volunteers throughout the state have stepped up to participate in those, and that seems to be going really well. Staff are continuing to do a lot of case management, and it's different these days. They're working from home. A lot of the people they're working with are at home. Of course, there are people who are essential workers still with whom they're working. The thing that is most striking around case management right now for staff is that their role is changing a bit. So folks are really helping people navigate. They're helping people file for unemployment insurance. They're helping them find food and other meet their essential needs. They're also doing a fair bit of emotional support and connecting people to family and resources. Chris Fenno talked about the concern, and you, Senator Sears, about child abuse too. And I'm hearing that staff are seeing how it is sometimes hard to provide those supports when people are in the house and don't have a private place for a conversation. So the work is pretty intense, as you can imagine, across the board. With the decrease in referrals, programs are seeing a significant decline in fee revenue starting in May. And at this point, it's hard to project what that impact will be on the budgets. But as you know, client fee revenue is an important source of revenue for these programs. It's about a quarter. They pay for about a quarter of their expenses using client fee revenue. So we're anticipating that to be a challenge going forward in FY21 as well.
Well, as we make recommendations to the Appropriations Committee, feel free to let us know how it's impacting.
Okay, thank you very
diversion
much, Senator
programs.
Sears. And I can quantify that for you.
Yeah.
So I think come the summer when the courts reopen, there'll be a surge in cases. People will be back in their offices very busy. I do want to just note, as you can imagine, what I'm hearing from staff, their biggest concern are people who are drug dependent or alcohol dependent, who are particularly vulnerable. Some folks don't have phones, don't have means of connecting remotely, and staff typically see them when they show up in their office. So that's the big concern that I'm hearing from people really worried about those vulnerable individuals.
I'm concerned about how the future will look, particularly those groups that rely on Al-Anon and AA and programs like NA, whatever, and group therapy. How that's going to look. I posted a picture the other day of a Senate Appropriations Committee meeting with the 7 of us, 2 witnesses, a whole group of people all around the committee. You've all been in that committee room. And I'm thinking to myself, how would you do social distancing just to hold a committee meeting? How would you do social distancing just to hold a group? Those are problems that we're going to be confronting as the system starts to come back online. And we're going to need to be prepared for that. And that's part of the use, I think, of the CARES Act.
Yeah.
But I appreciate David, did you have something to add there?
I actually just had one brief point to add. Willow really covered the bulk of it. But this dovetails a little bit with the first conversation the committee had today, and that was with respect to garnishment of state tax collections.
Yeah.
The judiciary's decision to collect for the first time this year Superior Court debts has led at least one, we've heard of at least one client who had a significant garnishment for old DLS convictions that were, I guess, about 6 years old. And they were expecting a significant tax refund, lost about $1,700, which was a serious blow in this current environment. And so that's not directly related to that federal issue with respect to the federal monies, but it is a sort of state internal issue which caused real hardship for some of our clients, and just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention as well.
Anything else, Willa, or any questions for Willa?
If I just want to add, just to build off a bit of what you said, Senator Sears, about how will we work going forward. One of the things that is different, that is being positive, is the use of virtual platforms with IDRP, formerly known as Project Crash. And so there are individuals who don't have transportation and haven't been able to get to IDRP to complete that requirement in order to then get their driver's license back. That's happening virtually, and we're hoping that changes like that may continue going forward so that there's greater access to IDRP and also greater access to assessments through telemedicine. These are all important services and requirements of people, and when people don't have transportation, it's that much harder for people to accomplish those goals. So thank you for the time this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you. Derek, and I can never pronounce the last name, so I let him do that.
Thank you very much, Senator Sears. For the record, I'm Derek Miodovnik, and I'm the Community and Restorative Justice Executive with the Vermont Department of Corrections. And some of the themes that have already been brought up in this conversation, some of the impacts are definitely consistent with the work that flows through our community justice centers and our transitional housing providers. And those are the 2 major scopes of work that I have the administrative responsibilities for. So I'll take a couple moments to share my perspective in broad strokes about how COVID-19 is impacting the the population under correction supervision who are involved with those services or the organizations that provide them. And I know we're fortunate to have in the testimony today, 2 of our community partners on the housing side, our partners from CIAL, and on the community justice side, our partners from Brock. So they can also speak to more anecdotal and geographic specificity. But 2 themes I think I'd just like to sort of highlight and then take us through how this is playing out. I think the theme of partnership, state and NGO partnership, has been really inspiring and clear and adaptive responses. And I think that that speaks to the resiliency and the strength of the model that DOC has, whereby we have long-standing grants to complement the work that we do with the pieces that really can only be done by partnering with communities. So the community justice centers really become the way that the social contract gets articulated by local community members whose lives are impacted when folks under the care and custody of the Department of Corrections have broken that contract. And they continue to do this work, and they continue to do it through the major service modalities, restorative panels, which you've also heard about from Willa, as well as circles of support and accountability. And both of those services are going forward for the same reasons that, again, Willa detailed. The panels work is dependent on some upstream mechanisms that have certainly been impacted, namely the courts. However, the restorative panels at justice centers also serve local police departments. And in part because the courts are now having to really prioritize and downshift, I do think we're seeing some local law enforcement make potential greater use of the opportunity to directly refer cases that are happening in their community to their local community justice centers, which in turn are continuing using virtual platforms to enact that same process. And the feedback that I've received has been that it's working pretty smoothly. That the caliber of the conversation is not entirely diminished by the fact that now you've got multiple volunteers working through a process with somebody taking responsibility online. And the COSAs, I want to take a moment to just stress how important those are. COSAs, for those who aren't familiar, are circles of support and accountability. There are about 3 or so dedicated community members who agree to meet once a week with somebody who's just re-entered and who usually, based on our target population, is high risk and high need. So these are folks who need a fair amount of structure and support and accountability in order to stay safely in the community. And as you can imagine, COVID-19 has really been an incredibly destabilizing experience. And so these COSAs have really stepped it up. They're meeting virtually, but we've got hundreds of volunteers around the state who are now calling the offenders, who we call core members, who are at the center of the circle, multiple times a day. Our early guidance when this started happening was, now's the time to really ramp up your contact with these folks. In some cases, the call that that offender might receive, other than perhaps the probation and parole officer, as Dale spoke to, might be some of the only contact that some of these folks are getting during the day. They are isolated, and their isolation is in fact tied into their risk. So the CJCs have really been stepping up their engagement activities through phone and virtual contact, as well as with our push to depopulate, consistent with public safety, the facilities. We've had some new people come into COSAs as well, actually. So more folks have stepped out of the facilities, as we know, during this time. We are conscious about who we're releasing, and if we're releasing somebody for whom a COSA would ordinarily be appropriate, that capacity has remained, and we've continued to develop those. I mentioned adaptive responses. we obviously are working in a virtual environment. We still have a need to not only stand up these courses, but to continue to onboard new volunteers. And in a matter of weeks, we've developed new online training curricula and are standing that up. We've formed some ad hoc committees across all the CJCs and my unit staff, and are beginning, as I'm sure is happening across all of state government and partnerships, to move pre-existing physical-based training curricula to an online platform so that we can continue to have the capacity that we rely on volunteers for. And that's been really exciting. In addition to the standard work the CJCs have done, they've just really pitched in their communities. And I've heard multiple anecdotes and examples. Everything from in Burlington, the Community Justice Center is part of CEDO, Community and Economic Development Office. They're heading up a relief effort for COVID recovery and prevention in the city. The CJC is a big part of that. On a statewide level, and I credit Commissioner Schatz for this, I don't believe he's on this meeting.
No.
DCF was experiencing increasing instability with the population who are getting vouchered to stay in motels in order to avoid homelessness. But these hotels and motels were now experiencing a big uptick in people who are not abiding by hotel and motel rules, and were threatening the very possibility that those businesses were going to be able to continue to honor those vouchers. And some quick conversations happened that have connected the community justice centers with the local hotels and motels all across the state to convene restorative conversations for people who aren't really following the rules and are possibly putting others at jeopardy of no longer having those vouchers. So we're having local motel owners saying, hey, can somebody from the community please explain why no smoking is really important in this hotel? And if you think about, again, my first comment about the social contract and how and when that needs to be articulated and what happens when that starts to break down, I think we're seeing the justice centers sit at that critical intersection in formal and informal ways.
The question becomes how we contact with people who, you know, do they have phones? Do they have tablets? Or how would I, if I were a released prisoner after a year or two in jail, how would I be in contact with the circle of support, the local justice center, whatever?
That's a great question. I mean, much, but not all of our population at this point have their own, devices, smartphones and whatnot. As we know, if you've been released with a conviction for a sexual offense, you in all likelihood have prohibitions against access to the internet, and that includes smartphones. But basically, all of our probation and parole offices are well aware and make that connection either through formal referral, if a circle of support and accountability were integrated into the case plan center, Sears, or as just a general resource that, hey, there's this community justice center and it's got a whole bunch of volunteers that are actually really available to you. So
maybe this is a good spot for Lisa Ryan to join us in a conversation about what's available on the local level, if you don't mind. I don't mean to cut you off there.
No, but by all means, it's a wonderful segue, and I'm happy to toggle back onto transitional housing after that.
Well, then we'll go to to my old friends from Bennington who are miles away, but I can see them both. Go ahead, Lisa, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Sears and the committee for having me. I'm Lisa Ryan, and I'm the director of the Rutland County Community Justice Center at Brock Community Action. I think that most of what Derek and Willis stated respective to how we're currently operating with the programs and clients that are in place is consistent with what we're doing here at Brock. What I will speak about is kind of the overall impact that this has had which has been really about relationships and relationship building with our clients from a restorative and transformative lens. That's been really challenging. So when we talk about the impact on programming, it's mostly related to logistics and accessibility. So, the process for example, the process for filling out paperwork has been altered. So we have to go through snail mail because of limited access to the internet or no internet, or like Derek said, they're not allowed to use the internet because of their crime. So you can imagine that takes a bit to mail it out, having them fill it out and mail it back to us here at the center. Again, no internet kind of limits the ability to apply for jobs, healthcare, IDs from a remote standpoint. So that's really imperative to reintegration and formulating some type of stability for our clients. Ideally, we would assist them in the process at the office. So that's been altered a bit. As far as things like getting confidentiality in order to work with folks or work with partners and teams who also support the clients that we're working with, again, utilizing different routes for that, for release of information, again, snail mail, that really can inhibit the process for readily connecting with an individual support persons. In priority cases, we are doing verbal permissions in order to work or speak with somebody. A lot of individuals are being released into hotels. So the system for contacting and communicating has been a little bit complicated, especially if they don't have a permanent address. So they're moving between hotels or family and friends, or they don't have a cell phone. So we have to contact the hotel directly. Overall, that kind of, affects the opportunity for a holistic approach and the fostering of relationships to take place, which is really central to the work that we do. Organizationally, Brock Community Action is more or less, for lack of a better word, one-stop shop. We are kind of this umbrella organization that allows us to offer our clients many different opportunities if they're engaged in one or another here at Brock. So if they're working with us, they can also get help with financials and budgeting and job search and preparation, career and housing counseling. So we're just looking at how we're still being able to offer that to folks without doing it in person and connecting those folks to the resources that are really critical in their foundation and transition process. So those support services and programs are not currently as smooth and comfortable, not only for clients, but for staff and volunteers as well. But we're working with that, and we're trying to figure that out. I want to speak a moment to the COSA and what Derek said about our circles of support and accountability. So we did get a new referral, and this is kind of an example of how things have changed a little bit. We got a new referral, happens to be a sex offender, 25 years old. So this individual hasn't completed programming that was required for him to really engage in back in the community. So we have concerns about recidivism and relapse and engagement. Again, he's actually in a hotel. He has no job. He has no income, no internet. So my reentry coordinator has been working really hard and trying to get him the information and the packets that he needs on our programming. We're gathering a group of volunteers so that we can do that virtually. But again, you can probably imagine how strange and difficult that would be when none of these volunteers or the client has met this individual. And we're trying to provide some type of stability and interaction to help this individual be successful. I just want to wrap up by just talking about the next step and goals that we have for our Community Justice Center within this agency is to serve the clients as best we can with the resources that we have within and respecting the boundaries that are in place. So that means being really proactive through constant communication with DOC and probation and parole, and Derek, and we've done that. We've asked our local Rutland Probation and Parole Office to send us the names of folks who are being released each week so that we can make those connections, knowing that it's not our typical route of communication, but we want to offer these folks what we can. And even though that they might not want to engage in any type of reentry program that's really voluntary, that doesn't mean that they can't access any services that we have here at Brock Community Action. So we're seeing an uptick, and we have a food shelf, uptick in food, with fuel assistance, and as well as some funds for helping folks who have lost employment. So we're really trying to work with everyone we can while respecting the boundaries. Our ultimate goal is no more victims, keeping the community safe, and having our clients be really successful. I know that was kind
That's
of
a big goal.
a lot, yeah, but
it is. It says it all, I guess.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I wasn't aware of all that Brock was doing.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Bennington Rutland Opportunity Council,
Yes,
but
sir.
I'm assuming that we don't have the same services in Bennington as you have in Rutland, because our community justice center is separate, at least that. But
correct.
But it's really helpful, and I really appreciate it. Are there any questions for Lisa? Maybe we could jump down to Bennington, going from Bennington to Rutland to Bennington. I mean. At least virtually, it's fairly easy to do. We have John Winchester and Jim Henry with us. John has been with CEOL for as long as I can remember.
1985, Dick.
1985. He was a very young man when he first came to work at 204, and I can remember that clearly, but not the date. We often find ourselves talking about kids that we had in the program back when we were there. And then Jim Henry, most of you have met, who's the executive director of CEOL, and you've met most of them through the juvenile programs, but CEOL also runs an adult corrections program. So maybe you can describe how that's all changed with COVID and a little bit about what you all both do.
Well, so thanks for having us. I am Jim Henry, for the record. I can touch base at least on the staffing part, and John can, get into the details on the, the ins and outs and the daily life. But basically with staffing, we've run into a couple quarantine staff who have been tested, and we're trying to follow as much as the state guidelines and CDC guidelines. And, we do have masks available for staff. All staff are washing their hands coming in, and, just trying to, be as careful as we can in that aspect. But probably most of what you'll want to hear is from John, with the daily life. So I will pass it on down to John, or unless there's any questions as well.
Not right now, but I'm sure there will be, Jim. And John just showed us his mask.
Yeah.
Provided by the local Department of Corrections.
Yeah, and we're giving offenders masks.
Yeah.
And
every offender here has a mask.
They do. Are they wearing them? Are they required?
They wear them when they're out in the community. For instance, we have guys who are volunteering at the local food shelf, so they absolutely wear them there. Almost anytime they're in the community, they wear them. I've had to pick and choose which rules I can enforce. So as you taught me a long time ago, Dick, don't make rules you can't enforce. So in this environment, I'm having there's not as much of a bottom line as there was a couple months ago. With
I can tell you that's been a difficult rule to follow in the legislature.
I'm sure. So just to back up, my name is.
We want to make a lot of rules we can't enforce.
Indeed. I manage the 208 Depot program, part of CEOL Inc. We are a 14-bed transitional housing program with 14 males presently residing here. So we are full to capacity with a waiting list. As far as how the guys are doing, there's a running joke amongst them that the rest of the world now sees what it's like to live on furlough, because there are some parallels between what they are required to do on a daily or weekly basis and what some of society is doing. So on one hand, they are well suited coming out of facilities to kind of deal with some of these restrictions, maybe better than some of us. On the other hand, there are real challenges that are presented to them. And probably the biggest part of my job and the staff's job is just to deal with the anxieties, acknowledge the anxieties, and kind of deal with them on a day-by-day basis, focusing on what they have control over versus the things that they definitely do not have control over. And there's a real significance there. Guys are able to access services still. What's worked really well is the medically assisted treatment. Guys coming out of facility on Suboxone, there's been a smooth transition between the facilities to the local MAP providers. So there's been no where a guy comes out and can't get his Suboxone for 4 or 5 days, none of that. And all medications. So that's worked really well, which we appreciate. Getting benefits has worked pretty well as far as food stamps, insurance. So those things, there really hasn't been a huge problem. We have some guys who are still working. There are some factories in the county which are essential and are still operating and are hiring. On the other hand, we've had a few guys get laid off. So there's that. A couple of things that we have taken, steps we have taken, is we have suspended the housing fees for these guys. After the first 60 days here are typically free, and after that it's $100 a month for a housing fee. We have suspended those for the time being. There's plenty of stress out there. I do not want them stressing about their housing based on ability to pay during this time. The other thing we're doing is we typically offer 1 house meal per week. We now have upped that to 2. Just again, to try to calm anxiety and try to meet needs, that nobody's going to starve during this time here. That will not happen.
2 or did you mean once a week you have a community meal?
Yeah, that once a week we provided a meal. Now we're doing 2 times a week.
Okay.
The rest of the time they provide their own meals. So, small things, but I think trying to be supportive and just trying to let them know that, hey, we're kind of in this together and we're still coming to work today. Every day as staff. We're in the buildings with these guys. So, we're fortunate to be essential, but it does have its own risks and anxieties. So those are the things we're providing. One of the advantages of our guys volunteering for the local food shelf is they get to come back with a box of food or bags of things. And the folks there have been very appreciative of their efforts. So that's been a real plus, the ability to give back to the community and to help out. It's been a group-wide effort, and the guys have really done great with it.
John, could your capacity be more than 14 if the Department of Corrections needed more?
Boy, with zoning regulations and just the space of the houses, it's pretty tight right now. The other issue, just from a safety perspective, is usually you've got guys working and out on passes, and with the restrictions, you've got a lot of guys cooped up in small spaces right now. So I would never say no to the state in need. However, I do have some concerns along those lines, and I'd be willing to have conversations, but boy, it would be tough, I think, at this point.
Are all of your residents from Bennington County, or are they from elsewhere?
Right now, all of them are from, no, excuse me. We had one guy who's been here about 6 months who is not from Bennington County. He came prior to this. And on the waiting list, we have some guys from outside of Bennington County.
Okay.
And we've been looking at those guys for the last couple of years anyway. So we are open to that. We would like to give priority to Bennington County guys, however.
Okay. And you just guys?
At this time, we are males, but we're always looking, and we've been involved in conversations. Derek and I were at a conference not too long ago at Bennington College discussing female offenders. So we're open to discussions.
Good. Are there questions for John or Lisa? And Derek, does this raise other things that you'd like to discuss with us? You're muted, by the way.
There we go. Is that better?
Yep.
So many people must be so happy that they have the ability to mute me now. I think my family is just looking for the mute button all the time. No, other than to say that John's programmatic and Jim's programmatic sharing is really illustrative of the great partnership that we've experienced across the state. This has been a big ask and a heavy lift, because as we've tried to, again, create the optimal public health conditions inside the facilities, we have leaned in a very quick way on our transitional housing providers. Yeah. And these folks are showing up every day in these houses too. They are really on the front line of risk as well. So I just want to publicly acknowledge our housing providers for really stepping up, really accepting their role as a critical partner, but also saying, well, wait a minute, we have to make sure we have proper protocols and procedures in place so that we're not in our rush to help creating environments that could also unwittingly, exacerbate the condition. And so I've been in close contact with all of our housing providers, and really en masse, they've formed a critical network that the department has really relied on very heavily to good effect. So
John, Jim, or Lisa, anything to add to? Both of you mentioned substance abuse, and Derek did as well, which is a good segue to Peter Mallory, who's, I think we served together, Peter, in the Vermont legislature on occasion, and Tracy Hout Tracy's from
the Rutland Turning.
Rutland. Well, we're sticking with our Rutland Bennington partners today, I guess.
Let me introduce her, though. I've got a couple of things to say, if that's okay, Senator.
Yeah, please do. But I wanted to just thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank the committee for asking us to be with you. I would like to do two things quickly. One is say a word about what VAMHAR, I'm Peter Mallory from the Vermont Association of Mental Health and Addiction Recovery, and our partner organization, Recovery Vermont. I want to say a quick word about what we're doing to address this, and then a word about the recovery centers, and then turn it over to Tracy, if that's okay.
That's fine.
I'll be brief. At VAMHAR, Recovery Vermont, like everyone else is, we're trying to use technology to its most effective level. And we're every day we're having a recovery check-in on Zoom, which is getting a lot of attention, and we're trying to reach out to people to give them help and direction. We're also doing trainings 3 times a week on recovery-related issues. We are responsible for the training of recovery coaches for the state. And needless to say, that presents some interesting challenges right now, but we're going to have our first virtual academy the week of May 4th. And I'm very hopeful that we will have a successful transition to Zoom, as you have in the Senate and the House, maybe. And we need the coaches doing the peer-to-peer work now more than ever, which really leads me to the recovery centers. And Tracy is a tremendously able leader of the Rutland Turning Point. The 12 centers in the state are a national model. They provide places for safety and support, and they face some real challenges in this atmosphere, with their meeting rooms closed, which host all sorts of meetings related to addiction and recovery. They've had to do remarkable work, again, with technology. Staff is, if anything, more burdened than ever, trying to do outreach and peer-to-peer using whatever technology is available. And, it's not there may be a rumor out there that because the meeting rooms are closed, it's saving money. It's not saving money, since we were talking a little bit about money, Senator. It's a challenge to find ways to upgrade the technology and have the staff to make this work. And this is particularly true for people in early recovery. We're very anxious not to lose people who are struggling with the earliest stages of recovery. And yes, did you?
Well, no, I just want to bring us back to a focus on those being released from corrections.
I'm going to shortly.
If you could, yep.
I will immediately. So I just worry, I want to say one more thing, which is when the surge comes, as a number of other people have said, the surge for this will come after the surge in a number of other, mental health and recovery surge will come after the hospital surge and the medical surge. Tracy, Joe Benning, Senator Benning has met Tracy a couple times through our recovery day. She has done groundbreaking work with her center on corrections and working with people coming out of corrections. And she's got some particular challenges dealing with that. She's the center that's done the most over the last 4 years. She's done great grants work to support it, but it's a struggle now, and I want Tracy to address that. So I'm done. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, whatever it is. Thank you guys for inviting me.
Good morning.
Our correctional program, I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with it. We started it in 2016, where we've provided recovery support groups, 2 different ones a week in Marble Valley Correctional Facility. And we provide recovery coaching to any inmate that wants it. Before this social distancing and everything closing down, I mean, we had about 26 inmates a week that wanted coaching. And we had a coach up there 3 days a week, and it had just gone to 4 days a week for about a total of 10 hours a week. And then the coach was also going down to Springfield Correctional Facility to meet with inmates for coaching that were from Rutland area and going to be released to Rutland. When this all started with COVID, of course, everything shut down. No volunteers could go into the jail. So that really has limited our connection, and that's, in my experience with doing this, that's the most important thing, to establish that connection with the inmates so they trust us. So they will come to the center when they get out. And we had quite a good following with the program, with people being engaged post-release. We've tried to see if we could do virtual meetings or virtual coaching sessions with inmates at Marble Valley, and that can't be done right now. I'm sure it's crazy up there. So getting that set up is tough. So what my coaches and some of the group facilitators are doing are writing letters to the volunteer coordinator at the correctional facility, to the inmates that they were engaged with, to try to have some contact. One of my concerns, this happened yesterday. I went down to the center in the afternoon to check voicemails. And there was somebody on the voicemail that I called back, and it was a individual who was released from Springfield 2 weeks ago. And he was looking for phone numbers to get into an MAT provider, because apparently he was on MAT while he was in jail, but he said they didn't realize he was going to be released that fast, and nothing got set up for him. So he'd been 2 weeks without MAT. So I gave him the numbers to the local places. He was in Rutland and didn't even know his way around Rutland. So, I wonder how many more people are out there like that. I know with Vermont Recovery Network, we've worked with Annie Ramanuso, I'm probably mispronouncing her last name,
They're very
about
close.
doing a referral for inmates when they're getting released, that the caseworkers would do to get them set up with a coach post-release. And we're still working out the details on that. So, but I mean, I guess what I'd like to say is I wish there was a way that we could connect with the caseworkers, or I don't know, just be able to have that communication so people know how to reach us, when they get released.
There may be a opportunity here to hear from Dale or Derek on that. particular release and the coordination with the treatment, as well as from Morning Fox, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health. So hopefully there's coordination for all on any of those types of services that offenders need. And it sounds like the person who was released from Springfield fell through the cracks in his release, but did not have the information on how to access MAT treatment.
Well, without knowing the individual.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
but the cases that the department has control over, we'll still do in reentry planning, make sure we have that's part of our policy. What we're seeing is all of them, there are sentencing reconsiderations where they come back and they're released immediately, or they're released at court, or they're saying the release happens outside the control of the department. It happens immediately. So that does not allow time for the department to prepare for transition.
I think David Shearer is still on the line, and I would hope that the state's attorneys, I don't have John Campbell here and Matt Valerio still there, but anybody who's released, who's been in for I know people are on the line. Hopefully that can get coordinated. People that are released directly from court, or who are not incarcerated. Hopefully we can coordinate something to make sure that they get all that information. That sounds like the old days when you got $5 and a suit of clothes when you left the jail.
Right.
I'm sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
That's okay.
Alice, did you have a comment or a question?
Wondering, it maybe is a little bit off. Are victims who are connected with the persons who are getting out, are you able to be contacting them, or are they not getting out who are in positions who contact should be made?
I think it depends on the avenue that they're getting out. So if they are sentenced, the Department of Corrections, our Victim Services Division has a responsibility to notify individuals that want to be notified that meet the language. If they are pre-sentenced, it falls on the state's attorneys or for other individuals outside the department.
Thank you. Tracy, if you can pick up where we were.
Okay. I kind of, my mind's all over the place. If anybody on this Zoom meeting has any, ideas on how we can, become a referral quicker, at our Rutland Center for anybody being released to Rutland. I worry about these individuals. I mean, most of the people that we follow that have been released, we've been able to engage by phone. And cold calls are not always the best. Seeing somebody face to face is best. But, we had a couple of overdoses here this weekend, and my concern is that the isolation, when somebody gets released, if they don't have a phone, they don't know where to go for resources. They could come to the center. We could help direct them.
I think Lisa has a comment if she would like to.
Yeah. Hi, Tracy. How are you?
Hi, Lisa.
I was just wondering, I know Rose Kennedy, state's attorney here in Rutland, and her staff put out the resource guide. Have you seen that? And if you have, do you know if you're on that? I'm thinking that could be sent out to the facilities and given to folks who are being released out of the facility back to Rutland, because there's a bunch of resources on it for everything. I think Turning Point is on it, but that would maybe allow for a smoother transition and locating the necessary things that folks are needing.
I think we are on it. I think that was a while ago that she set that up.
Yeah, but she's constantly updating it too.
Okay.
We
I can
keep
check with
interrupting
her.
you, Tracy. We keep interrupting you, but
That's okay. We had, quite a presence in the jail. you know, and we had, you know, and it's expanded since we had the program. I mean, I have individuals that were involved in our program when they were housed at Marble Valley that probably got shipped off to other places and they've been released. One individual who was released in the beginning of March, and he'd served like a little over 3 years. I am getting letters at my center from other inmates that he has talked to about our program and about the supports, and that they want to, I mean, I have somebody that's writing me letters that has been in for 16 years. And they've done a lot of work on themselves supposedly while they're incarcerated, and they, you know, want to become a recovery coach. They want to help other people. They want to talk in corrections. He gets out in 6 months. I kind of explained to him the routine on how we, you know, he needs to get a recovery coach first when he gets out to help him with that transition before he can provide that services. But word of mouth through the correctional facility has gotten out there, because I get letters from inmates I've never met that want to be involved in our program. And I'm worried about losing that connection by this COVID. And I know, you know, it's tough for everybody. You know, I just really want to maintain it because I think it's vital, you know.
I want to just urge all the players to try to keep that lines of communication open.
Senator, if I have a
Yeah, please. I'm trying to answer my phone.
I just emailed the superintendent, Sue Ransom Kelly, and Rich Eckroat, the district manager, to get in contact with you to see what we can do to brainstorm to make this happen.
Awesome.
So
you
they
so
should be
much.
reaching out to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dale.
So half the battle is putting the right people together.
Right. And I was about to say before my phone rang that, you know, it'd be helpful. It may be the same process in other parts of the state where people are not getting in touch with the contacts that might be able to provide them with assistance, particularly those being released who have been on bail or other conditions that aren't necessarily released by the department, or during sentence reconsideration. I wonder, could we turn to Morning Fox, who also, the Department of Mental Health obviously plays a major role in people who are being released from prison. Many of them have significant mental illnesses, including substance abuse problems. So maybe you could tell us a little bit how you're coordinating with the local agencies as well as DOC.
Sure. Thank you for having me. For the record, Warning Fox, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Mental Health. We, like other folks who have testified earlier, and as folks are aware, just in general, staffing and such is continues to be an issue in all various areas of our work. That being said, the most traditional referral avenue is through the from Department of Corrections into our adult outpatient programs, and we're continuing to do all of our assessments at every designated agency for intakes for adult outpatient services, as well as CRT services for those with more serious and persistent mental illnesses. Granted, almost all of those assessments and meetings are via telehealth at this time, trying to reduce the contact, direct contact between individuals. And so, as some of the folks have mentioned earlier, that becomes a barrier for those individuals who do not have access to smartphones, tablets, things of that sort. And so continue to try and find workarounds to that. One glowing positive point around that is in Washington County, the CSIP program, Collaborative Solutions and Integration Project. And they're continuing to have some of their case management services done face-to-face, that they are continuing to do some community-based case management services while still observing social distancing, staff wearing masks, things of that sort. But having that ability to have face-to-face case management meetings has proven to be extremely helpful in this time when so many things are done virtually. To have the actual human being within feet of you to actually have a more positive interaction has been very beneficial, is my understanding. The other piece that the CSIP program is doing is that they actually have started a new support group, a men's group that's being done virtually via Zoom, just like this, and that is actually supposed to be starting just this week, in fact. So actually trying to develop some further supports in this kind of era of virtual supports. So those are some of the different areas that are moving along. The one other piece that I just wanted to mention as an aside is the agency Pathways Vermont, the Housing First model. The month of March saw Pathways have their highest number of individuals placed in housing since they're coming to Vermont. And those are both folks coming out of corrections as well as mental health connected folks coming out of hospitals. But to me, that just speaks volumes of the type of work that they're doing and really stepping up that work during this time, knowing that being held in congregate housing only increases the risk of spreading this disease. And so the fact that they've been able to really step up that work and get such a significant number of people permanently housed it should be applauded.
Thank you, Commissioner Fox. Are there any other questions for the commissioner, deputy commissioner, or any comments from anybody who's still with us on this Zoom meeting? Senator Benning, and I just lost my earplug.
I just wanted to say hello to Peter and Tracy, and thank you guys for all the work you're doing. Peter, I don't know if you still live in Newbury, but I'll be the first to announce, if you haven't heard it because you've been on this call for a while, Chancellor of the State Colleges just agreed to drop his plan for closing the institutions. A lot more work going forward, but hopefully we're going to figure this out.
Good, good. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Well, that took me by surprise, but I shouldn't be surprised because Joe's column was in the local paper this morning. So I got to read about Joe Benning's position. So are there any other comments, questions? Anybody who hasn't been heard from, who's still on the call, who would like to speak on this subject?
I'd just like to say, Dick, I think there's a lot more going on than I actually thought there was, which is good.
Yeah, it's good, and it's, but you know, particularly for this population, I get concerned when they are released and the services are disjointed or aren't available. And when I hear that John has a waiting list down at 20, is it 8? Which Depot Street are we on anymore? I get lost with the numbers. I said to somebody years ago that they asked me why we called it 204 Depot. I said, well, because we didn't have any brains to think of anything else. So we just used the street address. So we've continued to use street addresses. So we got 206, 20, and you're at 208 Depot, right, John? So are there, you know, if he's full and Pathways is way up, do we still have offenders that are held for lack of appropriate housing because the services aren't available yet to coordinate with that, which, you know, I don't want to see people let out without appropriate services. That could be even have worse impacts, but so this has been, to me, this has been a very helpful conversation. I really want to thank everybody. It's helped me to understand what's going on in the community. The next step, though, for all of us, I think, is to question the capacity of the Department of Corrections. If we're down to these numbers, when we get back to whatever the new normal is, are we going to go way back up to the 16 to 1700 range, or are we going to be able to keep those numbers reduced into this level and then either end or sharply reduce our reliance on out of state? We also have the bill on justice reinvestment that's still in the House, and hopefully will get acted on whenever we have the opportunity to vote on bills that aren't COVID-19 related. So stay tuned. And committee, I think we'll continue to meet on Wednesdays if that's okay at this hour. And we may need to, I need to get together with Michelle and Peggy on this issue with the intercepts and figure out whether we can meet earlier or not, and if in fact we need legislation. I'm beginning to wonder, I mean, you know, we have the intercept of refunds, but that's not the issue here. Some people are going to get hurt by those intercepts, but I don't, we were looking specifically at the CARES Act funds, either the 1,200 or the 600 weekly.
Senator Sears?
Yes, Michelle.
So I just, while we were working on the other things, I took a little time and I reached out to Office of Child Support and
great.
to DOL. So I have a meeting with Cameron Wood at unemployment later this afternoon, and I'll follow up with him, and I'll speak with Robin about the OCS, how they're handling things. But it does seem as though as part of the stimulus package, those checks were not protected against private debt collectors and banks and things like that. So even though you have, the Attorney General's opinion and guidance about it under state law, however that's working its way, it could be you have an international bank that had that, and there's an account that has a lack of funds in there and bank fees and things like that. And those things may be coming out. And so I think one thing to probably look at next week is maybe how the Attorney General's office might be approaching situations where you have multinational corporations, and how does it affect Vermont law?
So maybe we can coordinate with the Attorney General's office for some, if legislation is needed to prevent some of these intercepts.
Okay, I'll talk to them. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll conclude the meeting at this unless there's some comment. Everybody stay safe out there, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you all very much for your service.
Bye now.